I really believe that in the global north, perhaps everybody, but definitely the middle class, but even much more so the super rich, they live on money that they have. I would really want to use the word stolen.
How much money is too much money? Most liberal theorists talk about the need to alleviate poverty. But if you're serious about addressing inequality, shouldn't there be a cap on how much one person can have? I'm joined by Ingrid Robeyns, a philosopher by trade, to talk about her new book, Limitarianism, the idea that for the good of everyone, we need to put a hard limit on how much people can hoard. Ingrid, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me here.
You spend a lot of time in the book reassuring people that you're not a communist. What's wrong with us?
Yes, so I tend to then ask, what's your definition of communism? So I do think I say explicitly USSR-style communism. I don't believe in that kind of system, also because, most importantly, it was politically oppressive. But I'm also, so that is the honest answer, but I'm also trying to take people along with me. So, So I also think I would like to have, and I can have in academia, an honest discussion about different economic systems. And so, for example, there is among philosophers a whole debate about democratic socialism and different types of economic systems. But I fear that if I were to say on the first page, let's have a discussion about all the different economic systems that are conceivable, I will lose so many of the readers. And my goal with this book has really been to try to reach as many people as possible, because I do think we really have a political urgency right now.
So is it about getting a fair hearing? That if you were to say, okay, I reject USSR-style communism, but I do believe that certain things should be communally owned, the market isn't a good way to distribute resources, that there should be a movement of the working class. You're saying, if I say these things, people will write me off.
Yeah, and I do say, that's also why I put in the introduction two kind of objections I've received. One is that it's not just me, but people who make this kind of argument for limits to wealth, either we're jealous, and so that's why we shouldn't be taken seriously, or we're communists. And that's why we shouldn't be taken seriously. And what I found really sad about the communism charge is that people who make this, it's not even an argument, this claim, they just believe there are two systems, the system we have and communism. And that's so sad, because what you were just describing to me sounds like what economists call a mixed economy. Social democracy would have that too. So there is varieties of different type of systems, and I do believe actually that's a discussion we should be having, and that's also the work I want to do over the next years, to look at all these different systems and all the different mixes. But first I had to make this argument about why we should just reduce inequality urgently, and also just believe and accept that at some point it's enough.
We're going to come back to communism, I promise. But just to start with, I guess, the foundational premise of the book. What's the problem with someone getting filthy rich?
There are multiple problems. I'll start with the one that I think is most accessible for everybody to, I hope, accept. And that is that it's basically the symmetrical point of poverty. So we all say, no, it's bad that people live in poverty, so we want to avoid or eliminate poverty. And the point is that you can just also argue for the reverse. At some point, just like in the case of poverty, you don't have enough money to live a meaningful life. If you have too much money, it also doesn't add anything. And in a world which is on fire, which has all these poor people, all these people who don't have their needs met, it's wasteful. So that is, I think, a very important argument that I think is kind of, that I hope is swallowable for a large group of people. But then, I mean, there are all these other arguments which really have to do with the harms of extreme wealth concentration, harms to do with democracy. You can't have extreme wealth concentration together with ecological sustainability. It's often based on exploitation and other forms of fundamental rights violation. And then what I think the most fundamental philosophical argument is that it cannot be deserved. So some philosophers reject the notion of desert altogether. I don't, but I really think there's only a very small space in our political arguments for desert. And so nobody can deserve to be a multimillionaire.
In all of your years of research and your examination of people who you would call excessively wealthy, have you ever come across what you might describe as an ethical fortune?
What would be an ethical fortune?
Well, one where it isn't steeped in exploitation, unfairness, hoarding, bending the rules, opting out of society, creating social harms through the way in which you amass your fortune. Yeah. Is there such a thing as an ethical fortune?
I do, at least, so let me say two things. One is I think it's a theoretical possibility. But this was indeed what we in my research group called the hard case. And you can imagine that somebody who, for example, comes from a non-privileged background and has the luck of, I think this is really how the markets work. And you are, say, for example, a DJ or you're a musician, and you just happen to be very lucky that your song or your film or your book picks up. And then because of the way markets work and the way also cultural taste works, you just become a billionaire. So I can imagine that somebody like this would I still think their wealth would be undeserved, but they may not have blood on their hands.
Well, take Beyonce, who I think is as close you can get to a deity on earth. She quite clearly has earned a lot of her money through being phenomenally talented, but her and her husband, the bulk of their wealth isn't coming from the fact that they're selling records. It comes from putting that money into a property portfolio, which then feeds back into a system of overall unfairness, right? So you might be able to become a millionaire or a multi-millionaire through your talents, but to become a billionaire.
Yeah, that's a good point. So it's true. So you're making a very interesting distinction, which is how you created the original wealth and then how you then further, I mean, they use the phrasing, let that wealth grow, which is like weird or work for you. I mean, there's nobody working for that wealth. It just, yes, there are people working, but not for your wealth. Anyway, this is a digression. Let's take, so I'm hesitant to give as an example J.K. Rowling because of her transphobic statements over the years, but let's put that aside and let's look at somebody like her. I mean, and I don't know enough about Beyonce, but before they started to then put their wealth in, say, shares and in the whole financial industry where there are these wealth protectors. I mean, if you happen to write a book like the Harry Potter series and then just be lucky, because that's the crucial thing for me, lucky to sell millions and millions of copies, I don't think that there is something like in that first phase of the wealth building or wealth accumulation that is tainted. At least it may be, but then you would have to delve into the details. So I think it's a theoretical possibility, but and that's why I think the argument from desert is so important, because I believe that on any multimillionaire, at least one or multiple of the arguments I give in my book apply. And the desert argument applies also to J.K. Rowling and to Beyonce and to Oprah Winfrey and whoever. Yeah.
You outline sort of 3 ways in which to make limitarianism happen. There's structural action, fiscal action, and ethical action. Could you just define those terms for our audience?
Yeah. So the structural is really how we set up the economy. And that's, some philosophers call that pre-distribution. So for example, to give an example how we shouldn't do it, so Elon Musk, for example, just does not want to recognize labor unions. If you have an economy with or without labor unions, that makes a big difference for how then what economists call the primary income distribution will look like. So
and so that's the balance between labor and capital,
yes,
if you're looking at it through a Marxist lens.
Yes. So basically, that first question, like how do we divide up what we produce together? That depends on how on the power balance in society and on the institutions. And so that's the first part, the pre-distribution. Then once you have the distribution, what comes out of the system, we have the fiscal system, taxation and benefits and subsidies that might make that less unequal. So that's the second part. And that second part is right now quite important. I mean, if we didn't have the fiscal system, inequalities would be even worse. And I also think that's where in the fiscal action, there's some low-hanging fruit in terms of changes. And then there is the ethical, which is a kind of plays two roles. It's basically just like what can we decide to do, either as persons, as families, or as group of people. And it is there can be two reasons to do this. And one is that if we have, what you just discussed, somebody who just had a huge strike of luck, I mean, this is a theoretical example, but suppose you have a really fair economy and somebody still happens to become very, very rich. I think they should still ask themselves, don't I have too much? Or are there not injustices where my money could be put to better use? So that's why I think we need, even in a perfect world, I still think we need this individual responsibility. But it should be, we should minimize what it should do in the system. And then the other reason is, pretty pragmatic. Like we have a very unjust system. So right now the question is, we can't just point to the system and say, okay, the system is unfair, but yeah, the system should change, but that's not my responsibility. So I can keep my money. So I really want to play on all those levels.
I mean, we've talked about one bearded prophet, Karl Marx, but moving to another one, Jesus Christ, is there an element of this book which has come from Christian theology and what's written in the Bible about wealth? Yeah. I mean, Jesus is very clear. He's like, you are not getting into heaven with any of that. There is a sense of there being an ethical imperative to give away your wealth. I mean, did any of that inform your idea of limitarianism?
No, so I was born in Belgium and officially raised as a Catholic, but really, and so that means I went to a Catholic school, which is where we also studied loosely some parts of the Bible. So that means that the last time I had a Bible in my hands was when I was 17, and I'm now 51. So yeah, I should say I had a PhD student who had studied both theology and philosophy. And once in a while, he came up with these examples. It's not just in Christianity, but in other religions too, that you have you have
zakat in Islam, where you're supposed to give away a fixed percentage of your wealth.
Yeah, and there are, I think in all religions you have, or you have just like every 7 years you redistribute the whole thing. I mean, yeah, no, but I think there may be some influence like in the culture, but definitely not in my own, it's definitely not in my own inspiration.
I was going to say, being born in Belgium, you do have a political tradition that you don't really have in the UK, which is Christian social democracy, which is still politically and culturally very powerful in Europe in a way that it never really got going here.
Yes, I don't think I was really. I mean, I've met over the years people who work explicitly in that tradition, but they weren't on the back of my mind when I was writing this book. But I should say one thing I really recognize is that if you try to write a book, I mean, there are so many people who've nourished my thinking. And I've tried really to acknowledge as many as I could, but I'm sure I failed. It's almost impossible that you But if you discuss questions of distributive justice, as I've been doing for 30 years, there's so many people who've influenced me, and surely this is one group too. Yeah.
One of the things that really strikes me every time I go to Belgium or the Netherlands is that obviously there is wealth inequality, but it is a lot less showy or gaudy than it might be in a country in the United States where someone's wealth is really hitting you over the head. I guess, was there a sense of a cultural distaste for, obvious wealth inequality, which kind of steered you in this direction?
Yes, I do have that distaste, but as a philosopher, my tastes are kind of irrelevant. The arguments have to do the work. But
it might make you want to make a certain argument, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I just feel, that's also why I, for example, give this example in the book of cycling with my oldest child, passing by a homeless person, and the fact that my child already just says, like, why do we do this as a society? I have that kind of almost instinctive reaction too. And I just, I don't know where this comes. It may be because you're raised in a society that is more egalitarian than, say, the US. But it may also, I really don't know. I also sometimes think that's just who I am. Yeah.
You talk about deca-millionaires in the book as sort of the point in which you become excessively wealthy, when it's 10 million euro or 10 million pounds and upwards. So I live in London. I have a husband and a cat to feed, right? That cat might want to go to university one day. I don't know.
Yeah.
How much money can I have before it breaches the limit of limitarianism?
Yeah. So I cannot answer this question because I need contextual information. But what I try to do in the book is to give the reasons that we should go through to answer that question. And I would actually, I would have liked to write a book without a number, because everybody starts to talk about the number. And for me, the number is not so important. But there were two reasons I had to have a number. One is to get the conversation going. And the other one is also, for me, the number cannot be 1 billion. I agree we should eliminate billionaire fortunes, but that is just not morally ambitious enough. If you have, like, say, 100 million or 200 million, it's too much in this world, given that it's, like you mentioned earlier, it's unlikely that it's not stained in blood, that it's not based on exploitation or some other grave injustice. But also, like, how can you want to keep that money if, or how can we want to have an economic system that allows people to have so much money, given all the suffering? So I do think the number discussion is important in that sense, that especially in the US, there are all these people that just talk about, we should get rid of billionaires. An example is, there was a report called the Global Tax Evasion Report, something like that, where Joseph Stiglitz wrote the preface, and he argued that there is a problem with billionaires hiding their wealth. And yes, that is a big problem. Actually, the fact that people have billions is a problem. But why wouldn't it be a problem that somebody has 100 million? So, but it may be that in London, you may need more than, like I say, the ethical limit is 1 million. I can see that in London this might be too low. But would you need 10 million?
It's a very expensive cat.
Well, then you need to talk with your cat.
I mean, you say that you didn't really want to put a number to it. Instead, you wanted to develop a process of thinking about money that people could participate in. What would that process look like? So, here I am. I'm earning, roughly the average salary for the UK. I'm not really on the path to 10 million, but maybe I want it. Maybe I want 10 million one day. Where do I begin my ethical journey?
But then I would really, the first thing I would ask if I were in your shoes is, why would you want 10 million? I don't see the point of wanting to want 10 million. Also because all the psychological research really says that if you want to have so much, you will always shift your goalpost and it will become like an addiction. And there's also some research suggesting that people who are in this frame of mind actually become not so nice people. That there's even, I read some study that where it's reported that even the mirror neurons, like these things that allow you to be empathetic to other people, that they become lower if you become very rich. So I think just accepting that. So I think, yes, we can have aspirations, but just giving that a kind of a putting a stop to how far those aspirations go is, I think, liberating. That's actually also what some of the multimillionaires that I interviewed for my book said. They just felt it was liberating to get away with their fortunes. And I spoke a businesswoman a couple of weeks ago in the Netherlands who has a financial advisory company. She says all the employees have a fixed salary. There's no bonuses. And when there's profit, every year, all the profit is given away. She says, so nice. I never have to think about this money. Every year, it all goes away. And that kind of mindset, I think would help us both as individuals and as society. But all of that is individual. But in the book, really, most of the chapters are about societal reasons, about structural reasons. And I think we should really have a public conversation about the political reasons why we shouldn't want to have the amount of wealth concentration we currently have.
I mean, we're going to get to the social stuff in a minute, but just sticking with the individual for a second. When you don't have money, you look at people with lots of it and you go, wow, you must not have to worry about money. Is the thing that you're saying that you never stop worrying about money? That you start panicking about protecting it or hoarding it, that a different sort of anxiety kicks in. Yeah.
So my sense is that the very rich are really a mixed group. It's not like you can say one thing that applies to all of them. But it's certainly, some of the research shows that, yes, even the multimillionaires keep having anxieties. And then, so there was this research by the ethnographer Rachel Sherman, who interviewed people in New York, households in New York, who have multiple millions of dollars. And they come up with these kind of scenarios, like often there is heterosexual couples, there is a husband and a wife. The wife works in Wall Street. The mother then, she manages the people who work in the household and then does volunteer work in the school. And then they have this scenario, yes, they have to keep that money because what if he loses his job, which means the whole family loses healthcare, and then at exactly the same time, one of the children gets cancer. I mean, yeah. So, but that also, if these are really the concerns that people have and not just like stories they make up to justify why they keep on to that wealth, that's also a possibility. The question is really, why don't we talk about what is needed to take away those insecurities? And that is really socializing risks. It's a national healthcare system, it's a public pension system, and so on.
What do you think of the argument that the effective altruists would make, that they have a moral obligation to make as much money as they can, to put that money towards addressing the long-term crises facing humanity?
Yeah, so I think there are at least two problems with the effective altruists, despite the fact that I like the fact that they want us to think about how much we need. One is that many of them are not very political. They really work, their unit of analysis is the individual, whereas really we should, I want to have both the unit of analysis, the individual, and the structures, but the structures are primary. We should fix the structures as much as we can, and then what the individual should do is secondary, except that the individual should actually try to change the structures, but that's, that's one problem. So, I mean, if you just give away your money, I mean, some of them even believe that it's fine to have a job in the city. I mean, like have what I would think is morally problematic job, but because you earn so much money, you're actually being really good because then you can give it away. I think there's something really weird in that argument. That's a problem. And then the other problem is the focus that some of them have on the long term. I understand the long term if you're thinking about, say, climate change, but really, I mean, there are people dying today. So, yeah.
I mean, there's a whole chapter of this book dedicated to taking apart philanthropy. What are the problems of philanthropy?
Yes, so I think there are many problems, and it's interesting that political philosophers tend to kind of overwhelmingly agree on what those problems are. The most important one is that it's not democratic. It's undemocratic. Of course, the problem with philanthropy is also, in reality, that it's often a cloak for trying to cover up the dirty sources of the money. It's also a way in which people try to improve their reputation. So these are like the worst case scenarios that I'm actually even putting aside in the book. It's also sometimes used as a way to avoid paying taxes or to channel money to your children. So all these things are like, I think, abusive. So I put aside abuse of philanthropy, assuming that we agree that that is something we shouldn't want. So then we're left with the philanthropists who are really well-meaning. Well, there are multiple problems. I think the lack of democratic decision-making is an important one. And there's also this epistemic argument that how can they know what really is most needed? And there, the effective altruists actually have an argument because they say you should try to maximize impact. So you should not donate to a university, but you should actually give to malaria prevention. I actually like that aspect of effective altruism, that they are radical in that sense, that they say, yeah, even if the most effective thing is something very unpopular like deworming children, yeah, that's then where your money should go. But it's very unpolitical, and we really need to make political decisions about how to redistribute money. And it's also sometimes they're buying their way into organizations that then sort of morally corrupt the organizations. So there are increasingly even people in the art sector who say, well, this money really steers the way we're doing our work. So it changes the...
Well, it's leverage, isn't it?
Yeah. From the point of view of the philanthropist, yes. But do we as a society want artists and universities and other organizations to do that what philanthropists want us to do? I mean, the problem is that money starts to really... The logic of money and the desires of those who have most money starts to kind of take over whole of society.
So thinking about what it does to a society, what does, huge concentrations of wealth do, at a national level and a global level?
Yes, I'm almost wanting to say, like, where should I start? There's so many, and that's really the bulk of the book. So one problem is really the way it changes our democracy. And here also the context depends, for example, on the regulations that you have in a country. But it undermines the political principle of one person, one vote, because they buy their influence. So very rich people can buy their influence into politics via sponsoring gifts to political parties or political candidates.
British politicians, by the way, are very cheap to buy. Embarrassingly cheap to buy. It takes millions of dollars of campaign funding in the US. Here, we'll be like, what's that? Tickets to the horse racing?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Embarrassing.
Yeah, so it's interesting that in the Netherlands we had a sort of I don't know whether it's a scandal, but at least a political discussion, because a couple of years ago a donation was made of 1 million euros to the Christian Democratic Party, when they were just debating exemptions to inheritance taxation for people who have a firm that they want to give to their children. And then there was actually all parties, except the extreme right, agreed that there should be a cap on how much you can give per person per year to political parties, limited to 100,000 euros. Of course, for most families, 100,000 euros is like like 10 times the savings they have on their bank account. So it's, for most of us, it's like, even that is inconceivable. But of course, if you are a multimillionaire, if you have 100 million, 100,000 is, or even if you have 100 million and you want to give 1 million, it's 1%. So the opportunity cost of giving away that money might be actually, for your own life, might be zero, whereas you can buy influence. So I think that is good. But then again, what we see is that there's always these tactics of finding loopholes, expanding the loopholes. So anyway, politics, it's the way it undermines democracy is political parties, lobbying. Lobbying is really a big problem. I mean, you can hire lobbyists. It's also buying up media. I mean, we all know the story of the Murdochs. It's, and then there's think tanks. The think tanks have been very important in spreading neoliberal ideology. So there are many ways, if you have a lot of money, in which you can influence politics broadly understood, not just parties and policies, but also what we talk about in society. So that's one important, the first one, politics.
So, right, this brings me back, I'm afraid, to Karl Marx, because Marx gives you a reason for why good things aren't happening. He says the politics you have is an expression of the class forces you have in society. And you agree here. You're saying the politics we have is an expression of these huge and obscene concentrations of wealth. So then Marx says, in order to make anything happen, you need a counterweight. And that counterweight is a movement of the majority of people. He calls it the proletariat class, and it will express itself through organized labor.
Yeah.
So I come back to, well, why aren't you a communist? Because Marx gives you the how and the why.
Yeah. So I actually should also rephrase my first. It depends on how you define communism. I don't object to communism if it's understood as changing class relations. Actually, I think we should. It's only that the word class, I try to introduce it in my book, and I do. I also, but it's again a word so this is a kind of strategic choice I made as a writer. I wanted to take as many people as possible along with me. And I don't want them just to open the book, but read it till the end. And so there's a question about which theoretical frames you want to use. And I definitely acknowledge that there is scope for other ways and other audiences. So if you target another audience, you can use different theoretical background. So I agree, we should have, we do have to have, whatever you want to call it, a change in the power dynamics between those who hold the means of productions and those who don't. I think the inequality, I discuss in my book inequality in personal wealth. But I have a colleague who started to tell me, actually the inequality in business ownership is even more unequal. So apparently there are people now gathering data on how the distribution of the ownership of say shareholding, etc., is distributed. That's even more unequal. So I do think the old categories of, I call them the political economy categories of capital, labor, and so on, we have to bring them back. It's not just Marx who had them. There's a whole tradition of other thinkers too. But I don't think most people would say if you use that terminology, you are that's enough to be qualified as a communist.
Well, I suppose, because in one part of the book you say that communism is an economic system with political implications, whereas limitarianism is a moral principle that should, first of all, guide the design of our economic and social institutions, and secondly, our own personal decision-making. I suppose the way that I see it is that there is no getting around the political implications of either limitarianism or communism.
Yeah. So I think actually limitarianism is definitely not ambitious enough for what we need. I totally agree. I think I also say so in the book. I just think whatever else we disagree about, and I don't mean everybody in society, I try to argue, let's agree on this. But and then the question is, okay, when we agree on this and we agree on some other things, I think we should also agree on staying within the planetary boundaries. And so a form of ecological sustainability. Then the question is, okay, what kind of economic system do we want? And then it might be that the economic system that I will ultimately defend might be what you call communism. That's possible. But yeah, I do think we need a mixture of different types of ownership. And it's clear that the current type of corporations we have, both the way they're run and the political influence they have and the inequality it generates is just morally indefensible.
Coming back to the way in which people become excessively rich, the way huge fortunes are made, do you think that there are certain things which shouldn't be allowed to be turned into a commodity at all?
So there is actually a whole literature and philosophy on the moral limits of the markets where this question is debated. So I think, for example, and many of these discussions have to do with the body. So there's a whole question about sex work / prostitution and all these questions like, should this be... I think the ones where I think for the world as it is, not for some hypothetical world like selling kidneys, I think, for example, is a really, really problematic one because given the world as it is really a route to exploitation of very vulnerable people. So these are the ones that are actually widely discussed. But I guess you're more thinking about healthcare or, I think healthcare, the media, I think...
Land?
Yeah, land is a good one.
Because they're not making any more of it.
Yeah, I should say I haven't thought properly about lands. But it's a very important question. Yes, lands, yes. And... yes, no. Work for me to do, thinking about land properly. The other one is really, but I also think healthcare, actually childcare. We've seen countries that took childcare from having it organized by the commons, people themselves, or by the government, or in a very hardly regulated way in this kind of a mixed system, and then moving it into... commodifying it. We've seen what it does. Relative wages go down, working conditions become worse. And in the case of anything to do with care and care of people and healthcare, the problem is that you can't really qualify. There is an asymmetry between the person who needs that thing and the person who will provide it. And if you then have a profit motive that is a dominant motive, or yes, a motive, it really puts the quality of the, let's call it the service of what you're going to do, into danger. So in the case of childcare, if you hire people who have to work many more hours or in bad circumstances, or you cut down on the rooms you have, it's clear that the childcare is going to be worse than if you have it outside the markets. So I think there's loads of things that should be outside the markets.
I mean, so coming back to our Beyonce, J.K. Rowling, I mean, I love Beyonce, and in some ways I couldn't live without her, but I think that technically I could survive even if she never made Lemonade, which is still a stunning album, right? I could live without that album, but I can't live without food. I can't live without shelter. I can't live without healthcare. I can't live without energy. Is this the difference then between something which can be subject to market forces that you can profit off of and something that you simply shouldn't? Because I hear what you're saying. The asymmetry of need when it comes to care means that it shouldn't be turned into a commodity. It shouldn't be turned into a for-profit service. Would the same not apply to housing?
Yes. So this is great that you're raising this, because there is a distinction that actually comes from political economy, which is the needs versus, we could call it wants, things that you want but that are not needs. Distinction that got totally lost in contemporary economic thinking. So in economic thinking, which basically has taken over the way the culture of society and the ideology, we have a thing called preferences, taste or preferences. And we don't argue about preferences because allegedly all our preferences are just equal, and we should just respect whatever people want. But this is, I think, deeply problematic, and I agree with some ecological economists like Ian Goff from the who works at the LSE, and some other people who've really argued that we should bring the distinction between needs and wants back into thinking about the economy, and then you could make those arguments. And I agree. Things that are needs, like all the things you mentioned, should not just be given to the market. But that doesn't necessarily mean they should be provided by the government. It could be, we have multiple ways to provide these things. One is heavily regulated by the market so that the profit motive is put into its cage. But there the question is, of course, is this possible? That's in part an empirical question. It could be the government. There, I think the problem is sometimes the government is actually, we've had scandals. We had in the Netherlands a very, very big scandal about providing for subsidies for childcare, where people were, this is, I think, the biggest human rights scandal that the Netherlands had in its own nation over the last year. There was also a big racism aspect to it, ethnic profiling. So I have also a bit lost my belief in that the government is gonna be the solution to all these things. But then there's, of course, the commons, people just organizing themselves. And I think we should, for each of those different human needs that we need to be met, we have to ask which would be the best system of provisioning. And also, there may be an argument that you might need different systems because they might work as checks and balances on each other.
I mean, on that point, one of the things which I always think when I speak to people who would describe themselves as social democrats is that you had quite strong social democracies in Europe when there was actually existing communism in the USSR, right? That was sort of a stick disciplining the Western liberal democracies and disciplined them into sort of having a different balance between labor and capital. You also had much higher union density. I mean, this is beyond the scope of this book, but do you think that in a way capitalism is at its best when it's actually quite scared of communism?
So I don't know whether I would agree with what you seem to suggest as a causal reason for social democracy in Europe, namely that it was between the US, a more pure form of capitalism, and Eastern Europe and the USSR. I just think the ideology at the time was different. So if you read historians who describe how we got into having this form of neoliberal capitalism, they say that there was really a fight of ideologies after the war, and those who wanted Keynesianism and hence social democracy won. But the neoliberals were active from the 30s. They just had to wait till they could seize power. So I think I also see that those who are now, this may be a judgment where you might disagree, but where I think that those who now really give me most hope in terms of really trying to work for an alternative of neoliberal capitalism, it's a wide range of views. I mean, like Kate Raworth's donut economy, I don't think that would qualify as communism, right? No. So, but I think her views are definitely against neoliberal capitalism, definitely. So so the question is, this is a question about your theory of change, right? How do we get out of this? I've put my cards on this group of alternative views akin to the donut economy. There's a whole range.
But for me, you talk about that post-war moment as being a battle of ideologies. And of course it is. There was a huge divergence of ideas. For me, what dictates which one wins is the material conditions, of which an aspect is that communism actually exists. Yeah. You've got all of these demobilizing soldiers across Europe entering into what? Yeah. That's the classic pre-revolutionary moment, which had to be contained.
Yeah, you might be right. I really don't know. But I mean, I also don't see how, suppose this analysis is correct, how it gives us the tools to know what to do now, except if you believe, which is, I don't know what I think about this, that we need to have a stronger group of people who really argue and start to build communism, so that then this will actually help those of us like me who want some form of green social democracy.
Well, I think that's what Zizek would think, right? I don't think he's an actual communist. He just thinks that in order to have social democracy, you need communism somewhere. That's his sort of theory.
It's possible. I really don't know I don't know what I think of this. So there is, in recent political philosophy, in the kind of tradition in which I work, there's a really great book by a Canadian political theorist called Tom Malleson, who really rejects the desert thinking completely. Tom is a democratic socialist, the way they describe this, yeah, so I met Tom 2 weeks ago, and I said it's actually nice for me that you are to the left of me, because then when I get questions from journalists, I say, look, there's this other position. So this is all, of course, about what is the range of things about which we can have a political conversation. And what I really find very important is that those of us who think neoliberal capitalism is really just, we should get rid of it. Of course, we have to think about strategies. But what I've seen also in leftist activist group is that people then start to have infights. And I just think, look, that's what they would like us to do most.
3 leftists, 4 opinions.
Exactly. But then they fight. And then the super rich and the oligarchs and those with corporations will just laugh and say, let them fight. They are then harmless for us. So, but then, of course, the question is, and there may be real disagreements, how far do we want to go away from neoliberal capitalism to another system?
You know what? I was talking about this with my friend at the weekend, so shout out to Barney. But one of the things that he said is that a good rule of thumb when you're in the middle of some sort of big leftist bun fight is ask yourself, would the CIA want me to do this?
Yeah.
And if the answer is yes, stop doing it.
Yeah.
I mean, coming back to the idea of limitarianism, does the principle of limitarianism exist between countries as well as within countries? Because, of course, there are huge wealth inequalities here in the UK.
Yeah.
But even the poorest person in the UK is taking up much more of the carbon budget than the average person, say, in sub-Saharan Africa.
Yes, you're totally right. And I should say there are current debates or politicians in the UK and Europe more broadly who argue also for reducing inequalities and have all sorts of proposals. And sometimes I really miss an acknowledgement of the international dimension. And I should say that in this respect, I discussed the studies done by Jason Hickel and his co-authors. And it's just like, it's not just that, like, say you have Amazon, where the people in the what does he call them, fulfillment centers, the warehouses, get like bad working conditions, bad wages, etc. And Bezos takes like all these billions. It's not just within the UK or a country, but even on a global scale, we really give breadcrumbs to those who produce our mobile phones and our clothes and all the rest. And the rest goes, I mean, they go to the north, they go to the global north, but then they go also to those within the global north that have most money. So we should actually also have a conversation not just about inequality within countries, but also globally. And here I'm kind of a bit pessimistic because I'm worried, like, how far this is, how much people are really willing to have this conversation. But it is, I really believe that in the global north, perhaps everybody, but definitely the middle class, but even much more so the super rich, they live on money that they have. I would really want to use the word stolen from those who in this global production get the breadcrumbs, and also from the future. But the problem is, the more you think about this, the more you see how deeply, deeply unjust the situation is. And what I just encounter is that most citizens are so far from this analysis that the question is, how do you kind of get them into that conversation? That for me is an important question.
And so if I just reverse back to you, how do you get more people involved in that conversation?
Yeah, so that was for me a reason to try to write this book with as little theoretical commitments as possible, ecumenical, if you want to say, and also to try to write it in a way that I hope is really accessibly written, and also to bring in all these examples. That is... it's not for me to judge whether I succeeded, but I think there is, of course, you have all these theories about kind of political avant-garde who will then take everybody along with them. But I do think definitely, because informal democracies, the voting system is really a system in which you can change things. But if the majority of people really are mainly drawn into discussions about what I think is everything to do with scapegoating, like talking about all these endless discussions about refugees and about migrants and about so-called woke topics. We don't talk enough about the economy. And I think that is, for me, very important to make it clear to, and people also tend to, they may be unhappy, but they may not have the analysis why they are unhappy. And unhappy is actually, they may be dissatisfied with the way they're... And so, for example, I think the data that are widely spread among inequality analysts and political analysts on how much of the share that labor got from production in the past, how that has diminished, I think most workers don't know.
I mean, is there a like, this book is predominantly about inequalities in distribution. Mm-hmm. But I was just thinking, as you were talking about inequalities generated by production, and I was thinking about it with regards to the fact that in the global north, often the very cheapest things you can buy are the most carbon intensive and ecologically degrading, right? If you're poor in the UK, it is very expensive to buy vegetables and oil and cook them from scratch in your home. It's a lot cheaper to get some chicken nuggets from the takeaway. And if you are poor, that's what you'll do because that's what you can afford to do, right? It's also a lot more ecologically damaging to do it that way. In order to buy clothes or things to have in your home, it's much cheaper to buy something from fast fashion or single-use plastics than it is to buy something that's going to last forever. And I don't think it's right to almost wag the finger of shame and tell people you should be more ecologically responsible because they're buying what they can afford, right? But it's also a global inequality that is re-entrenched through the condition of being poor. And I suppose, how does the philosophy of limitarianism address inequalities of production as well as inequalities of distribution? Yeah.
So I think so. I want to say one thing about the case you just mentioned, and then answer your question. So that is the reason what you were just describing, that the poor really can't live ecologically sustainable lives because they don't have the money. That is one of the reasons why we need something, whatever you call it, the Green New Deal, where the social and ecological come together. I've really been convinced by research by people like Fergus Green, who works here in London, that we can't separate those two. I mean, you gave some examples, but I think a really interesting example is in places where people drive cars. I mean, what the green well-off people now do is they buy electric cars, and it's good. But people who don't have money can't buy an electric car. So that I think is so the social inequality and ecological inequality should be analyzed together. Now, your question about production, I actually agree with. Well, you raise it as a question, but you could also say it as a criticism that there's no really big analysis of production, which I think would be a fair criticism, because in the end, the distribution of money is the symptom. It's actually at the same time the symptom and the cause of further bad things. And I analyze it in the book as the cause of further bad things, the undermining of democracy and all these other things. But it is, of course, also the outcome of a system that is an economic system, production system, that is deeply unjust. But in that production system, there are distributive effects in the production system. But many of the things we discussed earlier can come together. For example, the fossil fuel industry. I think the theoretical arguments really give us good reasons to want to nationalize the fossil fuel industry. So I've also written a co-authored paper giving those arguments why we should do this. However, it depends on, because we now actually have a lot of nationalized fossil fuel industries in the world, in, say, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and so on. It's not as if these countries are like scoring very well on keeping the oil in the ground. So it depends again on what we can expect from the government. So yes, but still, I think the arguments are really that as long as something like the fossil fuel industry is organized around the profit motive, we're not going to solve this problem.
See, you are a Marxist after all.
I don't care what people call me. I really don't care.
So I suppose in my final question, if you could get one idea from this book implemented tomorrow, which one would you pick?
Yeah, so I think this may be perhaps a surprising answer, but I think the first thing we need to do is, if it's about really implementation of concrete policies, it is closing tax havens and really regulating the flow of money, of capital in the world. Because as long as we have that, it's going to be difficult, even if we were to have the political majority to change things, to implement more egalitarian policies. But that is at the level of policies. But what I really think we need in society is to have a much more intense political conversation among all people about what kind of society do we want and what is the economic system that fits with that society, and really to bring the discussion about the economy and political economy central stage in the political discussions. And yeah, that's why I'm trying to make a contribution.
Well, we definitely agree with that. Thank you so much, Ingrid Robeyns, for joining us today.
Thank you.